Well, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome today's guest, Nico Misleh, founder of HRT University. Nico, we met last year now at the Silverback Summit out in Phoenix. And I was super impressed listening to you talk. It was absolutely fantastic. But for anyone who hasn't come across you yet, who is Nico? How did you get started in this amazing world of hormones?
I love it. And thank you very much. I had a great time meeting you and Max as well. It was wonderful to run into you guys there. I am a nurse practitioner by trade from Cincinnati, Ohio, over here in the United States. I got a couple things going on. I'm a business owner of a couple different businesses now. So I have a clinic here in the United States called Apollo Health Optimization. We're a little bit of a hybrid practice. We're actually transitioning completely to completely telehealth and virtual now, providing hormone replacement therapy for men and women, which has been just a lifelong passion of mine and something I've been really interested in for, better part of almost 10 years now. So it's really cool to see that come to fruition. And then I'm also the founder and owner of my new company, which is HRT University, where we are highly involved in the educational side of hormone replacement therapy for providers in particular. So nurse practitioners, medical doctors, physician's assistants, anybody who can essentially prescribe hormones is kind of our wheelhouse, providing digital courses and a platform here, which is all kind of launching as we speak. We'll officially probably launch the full course here by February, March, but we're going through kind of some beta testing right now, which is awesome. And then start doing some more live events and stuff like that.
Fantastic. And you said Apollo Health has been going for about a decade. What led you to this field? Because I'm sure there are others out there.
Yeah, and I should specify, Apollo Health has actually only been around for about 2 years now. I've been in the world of functional medicine for a long time. So my very first practice was really geared towards mental health, and hormones kind of became a big part of that, such a big part that I ended up transitioning completely to hormones. So my grandfather on my maternal side is a retired physician, but was a really big influence in my life in terms of he was someone I always looked up to. I thought what he did was fascinating. He always told me, Nico, never go to medicine. It's a terrible shit show. You don't want to be a doc. The insurance game and everything's a mess. So he kind of talked me out of it for a while. And ended up falling into nursing and then nurse practitioner. And I knew that I wanted to do medicine like he did, which was kind of this old school method, right? Really listening to the patient, taking time with them, kind of how medicine, at least most of us would assume it was done prior to insurance coming into the game. So I kind of pursued this route of I want to get to the root cause of things. I understand patients desire this now more and more so. I think COVID, for better or for worse, kind of broke that for a lot of people in terms of just thinking, why do things happen? Where do these things come from? And what is actually the necessary and appropriate treatment to actually get not only a reduction of symptoms, but actually better from a kind of more holistic perspective. So I went into functional medicine to treat patients from that root cause perspective, whether it was high blood pressure, diabetes, whatever you could think of. And I actually started really becoming popular for hormones because I started treating patients, men with PTSD in particular, which Dr. Mark Gordon, who's a kind of prominent physician over here, who really kind of was maybe the first person I'd ever run into treating men specifically with PTSD with hormone replacement therapy. So I started doing that for a lot of my patients with PTSD and having just tremendous results. So especially with my veterans, first responders, men of that kind of career choice. And then I started treating females, particularly females with postpartum depression and something called premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is a pretty harrowing condition that was for a long time considered to be purely a mental health thing. It's now recognized in conventional medicine as being a hormone problem, meaning it's like PMS times 10. If you ever ask a female what PMS is like, they probably have pretty not wonderful remarks about it, but PMDD is to a point where some of these women are, experiencing homicidal ideation, suicidal ideation. It's almost like a psychosis for some. And it's purely, in my humble opinion and professional opinion, a hormone disorder. And once we regulate that, these women have completely normal and healthy lives otherwise. So I always tell people I don't know what I struck a chord with a lot of these people. And there must have been these hidden Facebook groups and forums. And I think my name just started getting passed around. And so I was very fortunate. I started treating patients not only just in my local area, Cincinnati, Ohio, but really kind of all over the nation. I started having people drive in and fly in to see me, which was really humbling and gratifying, but also really telling of how uncommon this type of therapy was and how limited it was. And so that really started my whole process into, okay, now I love hormones and I understand them and I really have a deep respect for them. But I need to help other people. I need to just have greater impact in terms of my profession as a nurse practitioner, but just in medicine in general. Can we see if other providers can access this information and provide it for their patients locally as well?
Brilliant. Do you think there are more hormone problems now than 50 years ago? You mentioned your granddad, I think you said. And often we hear, advice like, just do what your grandparents would have told you to do, eat well, get good sleep, get some sunlight, and we go back to basics. But do you think there are more problems prevalent now than there was, or are we just better at recognizing them?
Yeah, I love this question. It's such a good question, really insightful. I dedicate like a pretty good portion of my course speaking to this because I think, hormone replacement therapy in general has been around for a while. I would argue that it started taking more precedence maybe in the early 90s, maybe even as early as the late 80s. But it was predominantly treated like any other conventional medicine drug. You got a symptom, hot flashes, here's your estradiol. You've got erectile dysfunction, here's your testosterone. Whereas I think now, and especially now, we've had almost, what is that? Since the 1960s, decades of exposure to these kind of novel chemicals, endocrine disrupting chemicals, xenoestrogens. We hear all the time about these microplastics and what they do on the environment. We have synthetic hormones that are in our water supply. And in the literature, it's very clear that these are having tremendous impacts. We can go over the statistics, right? Since the 1960s, 70s, we've seen anywhere between a 40 to 60% decline in testosterone. And that's not just in men, that's across men and women. We've seen, menstruation essentially start almost 10 years earlier now in some young girls. We're seeing more and more cancers. We're seeing more chronic diseases. And I'm not just chalking that all up to endocrine disrupting hormones. Obviously, our diets and things like that do count. But I think there's this idea, especially in the really far holistic and functional medicine space, where you can just eat your way out of this, right? Or train your way out of this. And I don't think that's true. And I'm not trying to be a glass half empty guy, but I think we have very novel problems. And I think those novel problems require very novel solutions. And fortunately, hormone replacement therapy is one of those novel solutions that is extremely safe. It's very well documented in terms of its history. And so I think not only do more people need hormone replacement therapy now more than ever, I think that people need it earlier now as well. I think the days of, we just give hormones to these little old ladies with weak bones or old guys with wiener problems are over. I think now it's going to, this is what I see in my clinic is I treat 20-year-olds and 30-year-olds for hormone replacement therapy, because the other solution is they end up on a antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medication. They end up on some ilk of a big pharma medication that's really just going to end up leading to worse outcomes in the long run, whether it resolves one symptom or not.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it made me laugh there because it's so true. You do hear a lot of people saying, yeah, just you can kind of eat your way out of it. Just need to change your diet. You just need to lift more weights. And the human body is far more complex than that. And as you say, we're bombarded with so many things in our environment. You can't change everything. So I do think HRT is going to be here to stay. And I think it's going to become a larger part of our lives if we want to be healthy moving forward.
I couldn't agree more.
So how much do you still, how much emphasis do you still put on diet and exercise?
Quite a lot. Again, the opposite reaction is, especially amongst men, but women too. They come in, they get testosterone replacement therapy, and they're upset that they don't have a six pack in 2 weeks, right? And so I tell people, testosterone replacement therapy is a amazing novel solution to a really complex problem, but it is still not a silver bullet for every single problem that exists in your life. We see the same thing with libido. Libido is extremely nuanced and complex. I always joke, I say, look, if your wife beats you, just taking testosterone alone is not going to fix your libido. You might need to fix your relationship. And so I still 100% agree. And in fact, emphasize that, testosterone is really a waste of time. Testosterone replacement therapy, if you're not eating and exercising and all the wonderful benefits that we gain from testosterone, increased lean muscle mass, decreased body fat is exponentially and extremely overwhelmingly emphasized if you are doing all the right things. So it is still a total misnomer that you can just also take testosterone replacement therapy and TRT your way out of all your problems.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that panacea. I'll inject this, and 2 weeks later, I'm going to have a six pack, and it's going to be incredible.
Exactly.
So do you teach people that side of things as well, or in Apollo, or do you just say go and do the research yourself, or we partner with certain people?
We do. I have a wonderful dietitian who I've referred a lot of my clients to. We work very closely together in that ballpark. So there are tons of people in my corner, depending on where that person is coming from, where we could, climb the ladder if need be to the right person. Most of the time, I'm very fortunate. Most of the time, my clients and patients who are coming to me, they're already quite invested in their health. They're quite health minded and health focused. So, most of them are coming to me saying, there's this like lingering, 10 or 20% of my health that I just can't seem to wrap up. Right. I do exercise frequently. I do eat all the right things. And yet at the end of the day, I'm looking at myself in the mirror and I don't look or feel like I should. And all of a sudden, that's where hormones come into play. So again, I'm maybe a little bit more biased in my own clinic, but we certainly do. I mean, we provide, an hour-long consultation. Most of my follow-up appointments, I allot about 30 minutes just to kind of talk. I mean, the hormone side of things, it's quite simple and straightforward once we've kind of got people in the position where they're feeling well. And then we save time to really talk about their life, their relationships, their careers, whatever it may be. Not that I'm a coach of all trades there, but I think it's just important to even discuss and then be able to coach or direct or quarterback those people to the right places or right people.
Yeah, the human bodies are complex, aren't they? All 8 billion of us on the planet, look different. Our insides are different too. There is no one thing that's going to fix everybody. And if you appreciate that we are complex and there might be something at work or something at home, or as you said, what your wife beats you, then that's not going to necessarily change the fact that your libido is waning.
Right.
Yeah. As an extreme example, but I think it's an important one to get across, because we do get a lot of men who say, well, my libido hasn't changed, and I've been on TRT for a week. And you're like, well, it's pretty complex. And we did say that at the start.
Right, exactly. It's funny. You mentioned complex, and I love this. This is an analogy I use, and it's not mine. There's a scientist who I really admire. His name's Dr. Brett Weinstein. But anyways, he always talks about human beings as or science in general. We have complex systems and we have complicated systems. And a complex system, he would say, is it's like a computer. Right? Most of us don't have any idea how a computer works, but at the end of the day, there are people out there who do understand that it's just ones and zeros flying around, and we have the motherboard and the keyboard and all this. It's complex, but not overwhelmingly complicated. Once you figure it out, it's pretty straightforward. And he always says the human body is a complicated system. where it's, well, the human body, the human male makes what, 10, if he's lucky, 10 milligrams of testosterone per day, which would be the equivalent of about 70 milligrams of testosterone per week. So logic would have it that if we give a man 70 milligrams of testosterone cypionate or enanthate, he should feel great. And that is exactly where all that, it's not a complex system. It's a complicated system because that's not true. When we add hormones, and all of a sudden it's not this one-to-one problem. Now it's we're totally changing the dynamics of the body, and we don't even understand it really at a cellular level. So it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. We're fascinating creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So where do you see? Because we're technologically the most advanced we've ever been. We're supposedly, therefore, the cleverest we've ever been as a species, and yet we seem to be going backwards with regard to health. You did say, and I agree, that following COVID, there seems to be a little bit of an upturn in people wanting to take charge of their health. But where do you think we're going? Is it going to get worse before it gets better, or is it just going to keep getting worse? Is obesity going to continue rising? Are hormone problems going to get worse as our diet gets more fake?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I'm an eternal optimist and generally a pretty glass half full kind of guy. So I would argue that I think I don't know, perhaps in my lifetime, things may be getting better before they get, or rather, things may be getting worse before they get better. I think maybe by the end of my lifetime, we'll see that shift. And I think that's largely going to be if we can, as a society and internationally, more or less accept that, big pharma and big agriculture and all these industries, need to have slightly different regulations. We have to, be able to consider that the financial bottom line is not always going to be the best for everybody's health. And I don't know, I'll be honest, I have no idea how you solve those problems. Talk about complex, but I do think it's possible. And I think that if we don't do that, we will end up in a position where there is no turning around. And I'm always optimistic that most of us genuinely want the best for ourselves and for our loved ones. And I think there's a compromise there somewhere.
Yeah, I think as you say, most people want the best, and most people want to just be healthy and have a great life and be with their loved ones. But there's these extremes of people at either end, perhaps, who are just really greedy and are making decisions that aren't in the best interest of everybody else.
Right.
Yeah. You mentioned big food and big pharma and all those things. And I think we're a little bit luckier on this side of the world because there are a variety of things that aren't allowed in our ecosystem, which are still being used in the US.
It's incredible. I mean, it's funny. I'm not sure if you hear the opposite in Europe in general or in the UK, but I have patients who they'll go and travel and spend weeks, maybe even months over in Europe, and they come back and they say, Nico, it's amazing. I lost weight. I felt great. Almost anything I ate, I felt absolutely fine eating, even in terms of some of the fast food. And then I come back here and I immediately gain all this weight back. And of course, you go through your head and think, well, maybe you were having a great time. Maybe you're walking around a little bit more. You're on vacation or work, but you're somewhere beautiful. But I hear it so often that it's now there's just no question. We compare ingredients to, freaking sports drinks or sodas or even, chips and things like that. We look at the ingredients and we add here in the United States umpteen amounts of God knows what kinds of preservatives and stuff that have been, banned in the UK and Europe for 10 or 20 years now. So I just have to assume that. I wonder if people from Europe and the UK come here and they say, my God, it's no wonder they're obese. I gained 20 pounds and then came back and I feel great.
The one thing we do here over here a lot is I went to the US and everything was huge. Like the portions are enormous.
Yeah, from cars to Big Macs, right? Everything is bigger here.
I remember being in Vegas and ordering some tacos, and they came and they could have fed like 10 people. Like it was just this huge, great big plate. I was like, wow, that's big.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what about exercise? How much emphasis do you put on that? Do you help your patients with that? Is it part of your life as well? How often do you exercise?
I love this question. Yeah, absolutely. I love exercise. I'm quite a big exercise enthusiast, so to speak. We talk about it quite a lot, and in fact, really a good portion of that hour that I spend with people on initial consultation is really drilling down. What do you do? And if you don't do anything, here are options that you could look into. I'm a little bit agnostic to exercise in the sense of, I could speak to the fact that resistance training tends to outperform most other exercises in terms of, increased muscle mass and decreased body fat and more calories burned and these things. But I always tell people, that do the exercise that you're interested in. You know what I mean? Like it's not unlike diet in some ways. Eat the things that are good for you that you're attracted to. If you don't like apples, you don't have to eat apples. You can eat oranges if that's what you prefer. If you prefer swimming over weightlifting, then swim. But find something that is at least somewhat enjoyable and tolerable so that you'll do it. Doing something that you hate is a really bad way to or really just about do anything. Personally, I've always been very interested in weightlifting, and in fact followed the great Dorian Yates from the UK when I was younger. I just thought he was fascinating in his training methodologies and all that. So I personally do a lot of what he would call, and what Mike Mentzer, another one of his mentors, would call high intensity training, which is a little bit different from, something like CrossFit, which would also kind of be considered high intensity training or interval training. But in terms of weightlifting, it's pretty straightforward. It's, lift heavy weights as tolerably heavy as you can and as safely as you can. But you don't have to overextend that beyond, what would be like failure to some degree. So I love this for my patients because, again, it's very difficult to measure things like weight resistance training. I've heard people say, oh, use like a rate of perceived, what is that? RPE, rate of perceived exertion. Measure it, right? Oh, that exercise felt like a 9. Like, what does that mean? Like, it's really hard to measure those things. Whereas all of us are going to reach a point of muscular failure or fatigue, and that's much easier to reach. And so, Mike Mentzer and Dorian Yates, these guys, let's say we're doing bicep curls. Well, find a really heavy weight that's tolerable for you. It's not going to hurt you, and hit as many curls as you can until you can't do another curl. Once you hit that failure point, you do not have to continue another rep or another set. It's over. So a lot of these guys, and I'm not saying that Dorian Yates only did that, but it's amazing they practiced what they preached, and what they found was that their analogy was almost something like tanning, right? If you go out in the sun to get a tan, maybe 15 or 20 minutes is just right. If you extend that, you're just going to burn. And if we kind of consider that same analogy for training, some of these people are spending 2 hours in a gym, and maybe they are actually training for 2 hours, but there's a point in which there's no return, and in fact, it could be more detrimental to your overall physique. Which is now we've entered this, kind of flight or fight response. Our cortisol's, extraordinarily increased. Now we're entering into a more catabolic state, lots more inflammation, and we are not getting any greater gains simply because we worked out harder or longer. The right amount of training or the right amount of sun exposure equals healthy muscle hypertrophy or a healthy tan. So anyways, I love that stuff. And I try to simplify that for my patients. I'm actually almost finished with like a little ebook that I've been working on for the past year or so. And I'm going to try that more or less kind of self-published and then kind of available for my patients to use as kind of a free resource.
Fantastic. And we've talked about how hormone replacement is, integral to what you do, and we think it's going to be a big part of health moving forward with everything going on in our lives. Do you have clients that come to you and they're looking for that optimal state? So they're looking at biohacking, they're looking at methylene blue, they're looking at HTH, or all of these other things as well? Do you get those sorts of questions?
I would argue that's the largest portion of what I do. So again, I'm really lucky. Most of my patients are coming to me because they know I'm in the know of those things, and I personally use a lot of those things and find them fascinating. So it is generally a, hey, okay, we've done the hormone thing, that was great. What about methylene blue? What about NAD? What about, and so it's really interesting to pursue things like peptides and all these other components of health that again are just, I think, at least even in the United States, appear to be more and more and more accessible as time kind of rolls on, which is a great sign too. For so long, a lot of these things were completely off limits, and not unlike hormone replacement therapy, especially testosterone, considered a scheduled substance and totally controlled by the DEA. I'm optimistic that a lot of these other therapies, even we're looking at stem cells again potentially here in the United States coming back into play. I think there's just going to be so much room for growth and again, this is where I do feel the glass is half full, because I think even outside of hormones, we're going to start seeing some very impressive holistic and systemic therapies like stem cells coming back. And that would completely change the game for a lot of our patients.
Yeah, absolutely. I had stem cells injected into my shoulder about 5 years ago in Mexico, for a really troublesome rotator cuff problem that just
Mm.
wouldn't go away. And it totally fixed it. It was fantastic.
Amazing. It's
Um,
incredible. I've heard so many great stories like yours. I'm very, very, very excited to hopefully see that certainly in my lifetime. That would be fantastic.
yeah, that was good. And you're lucky in the US because you can use peptides, and in the
Mhm,
UK, we cannot. The only ones we are allowed to use are the weight loss medications, which are patented, of course.
mhm.
But you've got access to a few others over there. Do you have a stack or a top five that you tend to work with the most?
I mean, I'll tell you from even my own personal experience, BPC 157 is probably the most well known. I would say, and probably the most helpful of all the peptides that I've ever used, and that my patients have used. It's absolutely phenomenal. And I don't. Are you familiar with that one at all, Ross?
Yeah,
It's an incredible, for soft tissue injuries, it's almost unbeatable. For gut health as well, sealing up kind of intestinal permeability and things of that nature, it's absolutely extraordinary. A lot of times, and this is commonly done, we will stack that with something like TB 500, which is again another kind of potent anti-inflammatory type of peptide. So again, we kind of get the synergistic, decrease in inflammation and overall rejuvenation in some of these very difficult to heal tissues. So think of your tendons, for example. We literally see in not in human studies necessarily, but in rat studies and mouse studies where, if you have a tendon and it's kind of frayed a little bit or partially torn, the BPC 157 will help what we call tissue migration, which again is, half the time we didn't even think that was quite possible to do with a tendon. And BPC, injectable BPC 157 in particular, shows an extraordinary and impressive ability to do that.
amazing. So they're your sort of favorite two. Um, any others that you use on a frequent basis, or are they the main ones you stick to?
I really like, and again, it's a little more difficult to get patients to take it unless they're really, really deep into the biohacking and personal health development stuff. But epitalon is really impressive. Epitalon, I've heard of a variety of different ways, and these are peptides. Again, most of these peptides are actually coming out of Russia. Which Dr. Cavinson was kind of the lead scientist there. He actually just passed away last year, but I had some back and forth with him and one of his senior researchers they were really super friendly, and shared a lot of great information on some of these peptides. But Pidolon is really in terms of longevity peptide, very, very, very intriguing. So again, a lot of these studies are coming out of Russia, so people feel uncertain as to whether or not they're trustworthy or credible. But they do seem to show that epitalon in particular seems to help restore things like melatonin. which rapidly declines as we age. It's probably one of the few hormones that really hits about zero for both men and women. And we saw, especially with COVID, that melatonin was even being used as like an adjunct therapy because it's such a potent antioxidant. It goes way beyond just sleep. And so Dr. Kavinson recognize that there are certain peptides and these little proteins that can kind of more or less stimulate some of these tissues to continue releasing and potentially even to some degree regenerate some of these tissues. So we saw that with the hypothalamus, pituitary gland, a little gland called the thymus, which is really responsible for a lot of our immune system regulation. So again, epitalon, pinealon is another one that's really commonly used. Thymosin alpha 1 is one that you might come across, which is, I've used that for several of my patients with really severe autoimmune disorders, psoriasis in particular. That seems to have a really good response to it. And again, if we're looking at these Russian studies, pretty impressive rejuvenation of some of these tissues, which we also thought was not quite possible to do.
Yeah, I love that. I love the Kavinson stuff. And he did a lot with the military, didn't he, sort of 40 years ago on the peptide bioregulators.
Yeah. So no wonder they were so good at the Olympics, right?
Yeah, exactly. They're decades ahead of anybody else.
Yeah.
And they're a little different, aren't they? The bioregulators, you might take a course every 3 months, whereas BPC, you take during the injury. Some of the others you might take for longer periods if you're wanting to be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, I love that. I'm impressed that you know about those bioregulators. That's remarkably uncommon and unheard of, at least here in the United States. The peptides that we use, again, like the BPC 157s, I mean, they're fantastic, but they're very small peptides, and they do more or less very specific things. Where those bioregulators, they're these much longer chains of proteins, and again, that's where we, according to the literature, it seems to have this really positive effect that, again, potentially rejuvenating some of these tissues versus just actually having one simple action.
Yeah, it's really super interesting.
Yeah,
An amazing area that I'm sure will get expanded upon over the next decade or two.
absolutely.
So what's next for you then? So we've talked a little bit about what you've done so far and what your passions are, but we haven't talked about HRT University yet. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I'm again very fortunate in the United States. We have quite a lot of education here, and I would say over the past 10 to 20 years, that's really grown significantly. These are private educational resources, WorldLink Medical and BHRT Academy, and all these different groups of potentially, a single medical provider or group of providers have kind of come together and created courses. I mean, most of these things, as you know, Ross, I'm sure in the UK, these things aren't taught in medical schools or practitioner schools whatsoever. I mean, they're kind of glanced over, if anything. And usually these things are these educational courses and stuff are focusing on synthetic hormones or non-bioidentical hormones. So again, in the United States, we've had a pretty robust amount of literature coming out, but a lot of it is fairly outdated. Again, we're kind of looking at most of these educational sources through the lens of maybe the 90s and even early 2000s, where hormones were for old people, and they're fantastic, but they're really for old people. We don't treat younger people. And then we have these more complex issues, patients with PMDD or premenstrual dysphoric disorder, PCOS, men with PTSD. What are ways in which we're approaching them that's slightly different from our quote unquote cookie cutter approach, which would be, your 200 milligrams of testosterone, your aromatase inhibitor, whatever other junk they can throw in there to make some money off these poor patients. So now we're looking at things like adjunct hormones, melatonin, but dosed not for sleep, for antioxidant, DHEA, pregnenolone. How do we optimize things like allopregnanolone for females in particular? Those are all things I'm really interested in and passionate about. And I just don't see that in any of these courses. And so it was kind of a dream of mine to be able to teach. I've been very fortunate. I have a lot of providers who will fly into Cincinnati, Ohio to train with me. But as you know, that's very hard to scale. There's only one of me and thousands of providers. And so the course will really take a extraordinarily, I think it will be the most comprehensive HRT course available. And I think it'll be extremely applicable in terms of not only just the practical details, which I think are extremely important. So often in medicine, especially as clinicians, we just want the bread and butter, right? Give me the dose, give me the frequency, and let's get on with things. But I think it's really important to look at the kind of bigger picture of things. If you don't understand that there are all these endocrine disrupting chemicals and problems going on, you won't really get a grasp of why we should be treating a female at the age of 25. You might just assume that, oh, she's fine. We'll just wait until she's 45 or 55. So we're going to apply a lot of kind of philosophy and theory and all evidence based to some degree, but kind of give providers as best we can what's going on right now in today's time, and what are the things that we can utilize broadly for many, many, many different types of problems and disorders that we could see.
Love it. Fantastic. And is that going to be available just in the US, or is it going to be across the world?
Yeah, international. I've got a private Facebook group right now. And actually, I think I need to ask. I know I have one gal, I think she's out of Queensland, maybe Australia. And I may have a couple guys or gals out of Canada, but it'll be available everywhere. I know the metrics are slightly different and whatnot, but we even discussed things like what's used in Europe. I think testosterone enanthate, if I'm not mistaken, still is more common there than maybe cypionate, but maybe that's changing a little bit now. Maybe
it's the other way around.
Oh, good. Okay, that's great. So we've been predominantly, cypionate for a really long time, which is good. So anyways, all those little things, picograms and milligrams and whatever the tests are coming back as, we'll have ways to kind of differentiate that. But all in all, again, it's extremely applicable across the board. We're still using just bioidentical hormones. So we'll essentially have a male course, a female course, a little bit more of an advanced female course once you get the basics down to learn about how to treat some of those more aggressive diseases and disorders. And then we'll have a full thyroid course, a full course on these adjunct hormones, which a lot of providers are really interested in. And then we're really looking forward to, at least I'm especially looking forward to doing more live events. I was really inspired by the Silverback Summit, which you and I attended, like you said, last year. And there's no question, I think being around other individuals who are really interested in this space, be they practitioners or not, is extremely important. Like, we all need this. We all need to be able to grow. We need to be able to meet different people and hear different ideas and thoughts. And there's just so much opportunity right now in this space, and it's not going away. So many of my providers say, should I take this course? It feels like hormone replacement therapy is getting oversaturated. And I tell them it's not even close. There are millions and millions of people who need this. And there could be, literally in my city of Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's a pretty hustling and bustling city. There's maybe 3.5 million people here. There might be 100+ clinics in Cincinnati, Ohio, and it's not even scratching the surface. Not even close. Wow. We could probably have 200 or 300 and still have room to spare. So I try to tell people it's the best time to hang a shingle. If you want to get into the business or join a business like your guy, what you guys are doing at Alphagenix is tremendous. Like, it's a great time to be able to get out of sick care and the whole modern medicine thing and actually pursue something that's meaningful and purposeful and provides a lot of impact to patients.
Yeah, it can make a real difference, can't it?
No question.
Giving someone some tablets and telling them to come back in 6 months.
Absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, if people are listening to this and they're like, I've got to speak to Nico, there's something that I've got a burning question, or I want to work with you, I'm happy to fly to Cincinnati. How do they find you?
Great question. So I have a website that'll be launching here in just a couple of weeks. So it'll be Nico, Nico Misleh. Nico Misleh at, I'm just giving my email. I'm mixing things up here. My email, I'll start with that. Nico Misleh at nicomisslehnp.com. And then my actual website will be nicomislehnp.com. So that's a great way to kind of just jump in and you'll be able to see my courses. We'll have links to all my social media accounts. I do have a private Facebook group. That's a great way for any of you who are providers, especially it's provider specific, to join. It's Nico's HRT University. If you just search for that, you'll see it pop up. I put my name in there because it's pretty unique for the most part. So you'll probably be able to find it pretty easily. But again, that's free to anybody to hop in there. We've got a tremendous amount of really, really, really intelligent providers in there. And I don't care if you're a doc, an NP, a PA, that doesn't matter at all. I'm under Nico the NP on Instagram. So you can find me there too. But again, it's kind of exciting. We're literally going to be launching a lot of this stuff in the next few weeks here. So a lot of you who are listening, you're kind of hearing the start of this. So lots of good times ahead.
Fantastic. Well, we'll make sure we put all of those when this goes out on the footer as well, so people can click on the link and find those things easily. But Nico, it's been an absolute pleasure. If there was one piece of advice that you could leave the listeners, the viewers with, what would it be?
Oh boy. I am a big fan of telling people to, following your passion is one thing that I hear a lot. And I think I was misguided by that quite a bit. I think that's really interesting. And I think you should, if you can, but not a lot of people have passion or things that they're passionate about. They don't know what to do, what to get started with. And I always tell people, just do something. Find something that is even remotely interesting to you, even if it's just a hobby at first, and just explore it. It's amazing how many opportunities come up. I started in functional medicine. I had no plans of ending up in hormone replacement therapy. And yet here I am. And now I get to meet someone like you at a conference, which again, 5-10 years ago, I would have never assumed that I would be meeting someone from England, let alone an amazing businessman at a conference in Vegas. So always pursue the things that you find interesting at the very least, and just see what will happen. You don't have to have this burning passion for it. Sometimes passion comes later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, really appreciate it. We'll get this out probably in the next couple of weeks. So maybe we'll delay it actually a little bit so you've got everything ready. But it's been a pleasure, and I shall let you carry on with your day.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, Ross.